Good day to all of you. You will have to suffer a little bit with me and my statistical information, which is going to be focused on two issues. One, where do we stand today? And if we want to predict what is going to be happening in the future, it is always necessary that we understand exactly where do we stand at the current period of time. So what are the cases per day? How many of those cases do we have? And I have taken this information for which I then did analysis, a short analysis from the web page GitHub. And this is one of the biggest world web pages where you can actually find a lot of different information on COVID-19, and this information can be extracted for the analytical purposes to your local machines, or your analysts can work with these databases on daily basis. So this is where I got this information from, and I was doing that on the last Sunday. Let us first see what is happening in the close neighborhood of Slovenia, and what kind of situation do we currently have in Italy. What is the situation in Austria, and what is the situation in Hungary? So those would be the countries from our west to our east. And straight at the beginning, you can see that actually within this region, there's nothing comparable to situation in Italy, because Italy really had a huge number of infections, and they also have a significant number of deaths per day. But today, when I was driving to my office, I heard good news. So the last day, it was the first one in the row of those infections that Italy had the death toll below 100 per day. It's still very alarming, it is unacceptable for any person to die because of that, but still Italy has seen significant numbers in terms of how many people died. But you can also see that the situation in general is calming down even in Italy, so in our closest neighborhood. Austria has COVID-19 decently under the control, so you can see that they had a big peak in the middle of this period of time that we are following statistically, but currently situation is going down, and they have this daily change of new COVID cases, and also the numbers are going to go down each and every day. So the trend is actually good for Austria. The trend for Hungary is not that good currently, because they obviously haven't reached yet this flattening of the line of cumulative numbering of the cases, but we predict that also for Hungary the situation is going to be changed in the next 2 to 3 weeks. If we move down towards Slovenia and further to the south, you can see that for Slovenia these numbers are quite okay, and the situation is coming down in Slovenia for the last 2 weeks. So in a row of several days we have 0 new infections and 0 deaths as well. So let's hope that this is going to be a situation which is going to remain, and majority of other countries are going to follow the same pattern as well. Croatia has similar pattern as Slovenia, so Croatia is also currently doing pretty well. From this part of the world, which is 5 countries, which are also countries of the European Union, I'm moving currently to the Western Balkans area and the neighborhood of Western Balkans. Situation for Bosnia and Herzegovina is currently quite stable, but still there's some numbers of new cases still registered per day. Same goes for Serbia, but Serbia is on the down line, so the line is going steadily and efficiently downwards. The Montenegro has actually one of the best situations in the region. If this information is correct, the total number of infections is quite low, and also they are already for quite some days reaching the flat line in terms of daily new registered infections. North Macedonia is also on a quite good way, but still they are on daily basis seeing new cases. So I hope that the mitigation measures involved in Macedonia are going to change this picture in the closest future. Albania is currently a different situation, so it is not following the same pattern as other countries, but you can see that this trend is actually again going upwards. So let us hope as well that Albania is going to be seeing some changes in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Moldavia is also not in a very preferable situation, because this is one of the countries in which obviously, based on this information provided on the world level, the situation is going upwards. So this is not a preferable, so this is not what we want to see. But then again, in all of the countries where the trends changed, this was in close connection to the mitigation measures involved or introduced in each and every country. When it comes to our region neighborhood, further down to the south and to the east, we can see that the situation is similar in Bulgaria. They're coming to the third phase of this COVID situation, so the trend is going downwards. Not that much for Romania. They're still quite high in terms of new daily infections, but again, you can see that the trend is slowly but surely changing in a positive way. And also the situation is quite okay currently in Greece, but let us hope that this is going to remain this way. So to summarize all of that, obviously majority of our region, you know, the closest neighborhood to the north, the closest neighborhood to the east and to the south, to the Western Balkans area is currently in the stage of change, you know, so this is a positive sign. But when it comes to the COVID-19, what would be the future that we can actually predict out of the current situation and out of the comparative analysis of similar cases in human history? So this was the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy from University of Minnesota, United States, was one of the first think tanks or group of academics that actually did some comparative research in which they actually used all the modern time pandemics, including SARS, MERS, Ebola, AIDS, etc. And at the end, they were able to find out that the most or majority of similarities they can find to COVID-19 would be the 8 seasonal flu pandemics that were already with which we already faced in the past. So what can we predict based on this information? So the pressing issues when it comes to the COVID-19 would be that compared to all the other pandemic diseases, the COVID-19 spreads, first of all, easier, and secondly, it is than the seasonal flu, and it is also, the transmission rate is higher than for, it is for the seasonal flu. The additional factor to make situation worse is that COVID-19 works like a stealth airplane. You know, you cannot see it very fast, you know, and when you are already catching the disease, it might be a little bit late. So in those 1 to 6 days in which you can get infected, you are a big danger to all people around you, because this is the time in which you can be a spread, you can be spreading this disease to other people. So stealthness is also a very significant factor for COVID-19. This current outbreak is, according to the analysis done, will most likely last between 18 to 24 months. So those of you which predicted that this is going to go on for quite some time were probably right. But you know what, when it comes to the prediction of the future, you can never be totally sure what is going to happen, because we have a significant role in all of this. So the mitigation measures which we involve on a daily basis, nationally, internationally, in the world scale, might have a big influence to what will happen in the future. The general prediction is that we are not going to reach the safe phase of the COVID-19 before the 60 to 70% of population will be immune. So they will be on one or the other way infected with the COVID-19, and majority of them would actually go through this infection without any significant problems. But there is still a big chance that some of them will going to suffer severely, being sent to hospitals, being on the special medical measures, and unfortunately a lot of them are going to die. And this is true, you know, I have a lot of contacts with people, and some of them would say, you know what, but this is not a problem currently, for example, in Slovenia, but they do not understand that we do not have high numbers exactly because we were acting in preventive way. If we didn't do that, you know, if we would just let Darwin to do his business, then we would see numbers going sky high. And some countries in the world have seen that, and they obviously today regret that they were not prepared or they didn't introduce those mitigation measures on time. Cases that we are still going to see may come in waves, and those intervals between the waves will be different from a geographical territory to another geographical territory, state to state, and again pretty much dependent on our mitigation measures that we will introduce. The experts, they predicted 3 possible scenarios. The first one they called peaks and valleys, because this line that represents the cases, the new cases on the timeline will be interchanged, you know, with the peaks and valleys. And if we started with the measuring of this COVID-19 or registering cases in spring of 2020, those waves will continue through the summer this year, and waves will be consistent over the 1 to 2 year period. So this will be going on for quite some time. They expect that these waves will gradually diminish in 2021. So this is one of good scenarios. But again, everything will be dependent on the mitigation measures. The periodic reinstitution and relaxation mitigation measures is going to be interchangeable, and they will take place over the next 1 to 3 years. So a lot of countries will be faced with this constant change on, you know, the mood. First to introduce measures, then to ease them down and introduce them back again. So this is one of the, let's say, good scenarios, although we have 3 bad scenarios, but this one is the second most worst scenario. The second scenario is called fall peak, and this is the worst possible scenario. So again, we have seen start of this pandemic in spring 2020, but we expect, or the experts, they expect a much larger wave in the fall or winter of 2020. And why do they do that? Because they have found some resemblance with the seasonal flu that they have studied in the past, and I will touch those seasonal flus a little bit later. So if this scenario happens, then after winter of 2020, then in the next year, 2021, we will have subsequent waves which will going to follow the same possible pattern as we have seen currently in the world. It will be necessary to reinstitute some of the mitigation measures, and those are going to be necessary to do 2 things. First one, to reduce the spread of infection, and the second one is to prevent for healthcare system to be overwhelmed. And this is exactly what happened in countries which have seen large numbers of people dying because of COVID-19. Simply, the medical system was not capable to deal with such a big number of people seriously ill because of COVID-19. And this has happened in the north of Italy. This is happening in New York. Okay, not anymore at this large numbers, but it still happens in all the countries where the medical system was not able to cope with the number of new cases. This scenario number 2 is based on similar things that we have already seen in seasonal flu pandemics. You can see on the screen which of those were they, and it was typical for all of them that they started somewhere in spring or at the end of the winter of a specific year, and then those waves were interchanging through the next year or 2 years. So in some of those cases we could also we were able to see those big or larger wave that was following this summer period in autumn or in winter. So this is what was typical for those pandemics which are the closer to be compared to COVID-19. The scenario number 3 is the best of those 3, which is called slow burn. It means that we are pretty much, after we have seen this big peak in spring 2020, this is going to slowly burn out, and the transmission cases will occur time to time, but not in large number anymore. So there is not predicted that it will be in clear wave patterns. So it depends on, again, on geographical area of the world, on mitigation measures introduced by specific countries, on how those waves are going to look like. And I have to remind you all, in the past we have seen already some changes, including in Slovenia. After a couple of weeks, it looked like that we are already reaching the peak of this pandemics and the numbers goes down, but this has changed in Slovenia 4 to 5 times. So when we thought that we are on the good side, the situation changed significantly in the last couple of days. So it is not totally sure what is going to happen. Well, this scenario number 3 is going to be positive in the way that institutional mitigation measures is not very likely. But I have to stress again, this is the least likely scenario according to the people which are actually experts in doing this type of analysis. What would be recommendations coming out of this situation? Due to the fact that we are pretty much all professionals in security business, we know that whatever situation we are preparing for, we always have to have in mind the different scenarios, and we need to be prepared for the worst of those scenarios. And this is one of the aims of our today's webinar, we all understand that there is still going to be things happening that we do not want to see, but we have no significant influence to that, and we have to be prepared for the worst possible scenario. So planning needs to be in line with this. So the 2 major factors why we might see scenario number 2 is that there is very unlikely that the vaccine is going to be available very soon. To some experts' opinions, it will take 1 to 2 years before we have this vaccine available. And there again, in this time, the virus can be modified. We can see different changes in the virus, which is already happening. There is constant adaptation to the situation by the virus itself, and we are also not going to be able to reach this so-called herd immunity in time. We need to develop the strategies to ensure the adequate protection for the people which are in the first lines of defense. So first of all, those would be healthcare workers. So we cannot go through the situation that we wouldn't have significant protection gear for those people, and also for the first responders, which come usually close to people infected. Those would be police officers, fire department officials, civil protection people, etc. So a lot of different very vulnerable groups of professionals. We need to work more concrete. So when this COVID-19 situation broke out, we had plans in majority of countries. Some were better, some not that good prepared, and I have to admit that even for Slovenia this came to some certain extent as a surprise. When we went to read our books on what to do in these cases, we found out that a lot of this stuff was pretty academic. It was not equipped with a very concrete action that we need to take into account. But we have learned from our mistakes, and we also learned about what works good and what doesn't work that good in this situation. So one of the important things is that we need to develop triggers which are going to remind us when to institute mitigation measures and when we can ease them again, because these waves are going to be more or less something that is going to be shortly happening. Another thing that is also very important for us is that we are speaking to the public openly, so because if I again take a case of Slovenia, a lot of people that I know, they think we are out of the worst, so this is going to be done by summer or by autumn. So a lot of people, they do not understand that there's a good chance that the situation will be happening again. So we as professionals, we always have to communicate to the public that they need to be prepared and they need to expect worsening of the situation. So thank you very much, Rock. I'm pretty much done. I'll be answering the questions if there might be some at the end of this meeting.
Great. Thank you, Andrei, very much for your presentation. I really hope that the scenario 3 happens, as I'm pretty sure everyone does. So let me just introduce our next speaker for today, Mr. Jože Senica, the Deputy Director General. Jože, thank you very much for being today here with us. And you have the mic and also our attention.
Thank you very much, Rock. Hello and welcome to all the participants also on my behalf. I will outline briefly the measures that the Slovenian police undertook to react to the epidemic. Activities undertaken by Slovenian police have unfolded into a fully fledged plan, despite the fact that there was just no way of planning for the most of the activities. Namely, the COVID-19 outbreak took everyone by surprise. The responses were varied from country to country, so this plan was not elaborated at once or in advance. It was continuously changed and adapted as the time passed. We could divide our activities into 6 groups. First and foremost, there was the concern for the well-being of our employees. As the virus broke out, very little was known on how it would affect policemen. The fact was that the policemen were more exposed than the rest of the population, and we needed to continue to ensure the security. The second group contains the organizational changes introduced, aimed both to secure the general security and to enforce the government decrees, as well to secure the well-being and physical security of our employees. Number 3, due to the circumstances and especially in the view of the available human, financial and technical resources, along with many additional tasks, we rearranged our priorities. Number 4, we had to establish new and efficient forms of cooperation with all the relevant actors with the stake and in the fight against the virus spread. Number 5, despite that the government took over informing the public, we found that they required an additional set of information on all the details and modalities, also referring to the execution of police powers and tasks in the framework of fighting the epidemic. The remaining group of activities relates to the concrete execution of the general police powers and tasks. I would like to stress that all these activities were carried out within a very tight time frame. There was no time for any kind of training, and our policemen took over completely new obligations where they needed to demonstrate high flexibility and swift reaction. As mentioned, ensuring the well-being of our officers was top priority. It is impossible to take care of others if you don't first take care of our employees. They were immediately instructed in detail on when and how to use the protective equipment. We also instructed them to check their temperature, to use disinfectants and constantly maintain hand hygiene, maintain interpersonal distance, disinfect or clean their uniforms on a regular basis, and also on how to act when they are not at job and they are at home. We issued additional instructions on how to execute police procedure involving persons and how to act when having to use coercive means. The most significant changes for our employees were the series of urgent meetings, strict rules related to the working in closed spaces, the mandatory use of masks, gloves, and regular disinfection. We also kept all interior doors opened at all times, just as an example, in order to reduce the need to touch doors and door handles. In case when an employee had come into contact with an infected person, or the employee had an elevated body temperature or any other typical symptoms, they were to immediately self-isolate and inform their superiors. This also involved the strict obligation for the employee to report immediately if they had been in contact with the possibly infected persons. Even if that person was demonstrating only some and not at all of the typical symptoms. An important strategic decision was made immediately after the epidemic was announced, to keep a minimum of 1/3 employees off the field. It was recommended to them to use up their vacation left over from 2019 or put in their extra working hours. We also instructed their superiors to issue orders on working from home whenever it is possible. In fact, we were surprised by how many tasks can be accomplished by working from home, especially if the necessary IT infrastructure was available. Administrative duties and paperwork reporting, for example, combined with the distant and secure access to the police databases. Whenever a police employee turned out to be a positive to the virus, their wider unit or department were tested as a preventive measure. The results, which were mostly negative, helped to ensure a continued work performance of all those who had been in contact. On a daily basis, we monitored the numbers of employees present at work, of those working from home, of those undergoing self-isolation, and those infected. On our worst day, the entire force had little over 20 employees absent due to the virus, 6 ill employees, and around 15 of those who were just self-isolated. In order to maintain interpersonal distance, we ordered that each police car was not to hold more than one person at a time, despite the usual practice of patrolling with 2 or more persons in one vehicle. The patrols were thus executed with use of 2 vehicles. This enabled us at the same time to increase our visibility in the field and the perceived presence in the field after we had to reduce the working force by 1/3. In order to ensure efficient work on the one hand and to provide for long-term sustainability on the other hand, some drastic organizational measures had to be undertaken since we were faced with the extra workload. First, there was the need to ensure reserves. Since no one was in a position to predict how the epidemics would evolve further, we ensured a strategic reserve force. As mentioned, 1/3 of regularly employed force had been moved off the field in order to minimize the contagion. We established a 24/7 command to monitor and coordinate nationally and activities related to preventing the virus spread, along with the measures intend to mitigate the consequences of the epidemic. It coordinates the concrete activities within the police itself, the measures executed together with other state sectors like customs, state administration, roads and highways, health inspectorate, etc., and those co-executed with neighboring countries. The command, this operational center, is still operational. The Slovenian police also has the so-called reserve police force made out of volunteers who are especially trained to assist with the police work. Many of them are retired policemen. An epidemic is a situation which enables us to call reserve force to duty, and we did call on a part of the reserve force. As stated, we constantly made sure that there was not public perception or of diminished security or of a smaller field presence. This was also achieved by having just one police officer in each vehicle. We issued also new demands in order to adapt the severe circumstances, namely all measures undertaken at any level to stop the virus spread were monitored daily. Daily reports were handed in as to the number of measures undertaken, number of warnings, procedures, organized convoys, state of employees, and similar. One of the most drastic measures was the introduction of the control points at the borders and prohibiting entry at the borders with Austria, Italy, and Hungary. And it needs to be stressed that these are all internal Schengen borders where there is no border control since early 2007, and to establish 34 control points at these borders turns out to be highly demanding. Certain infrastructure had to be put in place, and the traffic regime had to be adapted, not to mention basic security. In the initial phases of the epidemic, we were among the first ones to enable transit of cargo. We enabled more than 1,000 cargo trucks to pass Slovenia and organized convoys with escort. Due to the circumstances, we are also somehow amending our modus operandi in terms of securing the green border, where the Slovenian armed forces is assisting. And also we have to mention that bilateral border crossings with Croatia were temporarily closed, which also provided us with the number of much needed human resources. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we had to adapt our priorities to the situation. The usual priorities and those planned for the epidemic became of secondary relevance. Primary attention was given to those measures decided by the government and transferred over to the Slovenian police execution. These measures will be presented later by my colleague Daniel Lorbek. Initially, we organized more than 20 freight convoys in order to ensure the basic supply of Slovenia and the wider region. This way, that part of economy which had not stopped due to the epidemic could continue remain operational. In addition, we also organized a series of humanitarian convoys enabling people to return to their homes. In the fight against crime, the first priority was given to the activities abusing situation for their profit making. The demand in Europe for protective equipment was significantly higher than the supply possibilities, and our primary focus was on detecting fraudulent offers and sales, and special attention was also given to domestic violence, where we identified quite a few systemic issues, especially in dealing with cases in a household where the virus infection was present. For instance, we did not have houses for infected victims of domestic violence. The next priority were measures related to crossing the borders. Despite that border crossing was in principle not allowed, there were a number of exceptions and requirements, like owners of property on both sides of the border, local residents, economic activity, emergency assistance, and other. And last but not least, we have to mention migration. Despite the epidemics, the migration flow did not stop. Multiplied risks are associated with illegal migration at the time of the epidemic, from criminal activity to increased risk for the virus to spread. Concerning the cross-border cooperation at the time of epidemic becomes even more important. In addition to our regular activity, which has itself required very intensive cooperation, we also had several other international priority tasks, such as the organization of cargo transit and humanitarian convoys. Regular video conferencing was introduced with the heads of police from neighboring countries. They were initially held twice a week and are currently still being held once a week, with Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Hungary, Italy and Serbia joined the conference convened by our Director General. Daily contacts and at local and regional levels are of great operational significance. The established international lines are also up and working 24/7, and our liaison officers have a crucial role at this time, as they are also directly representing police management in foreign lands. Concerning the national cooperation, regular contacts were established with all relevant national stakeholders. A representative of the police was also part of the National Coordination Task Force. We were gathering all the relevant data and provided them to the government in order to enable easier decision making as to the introduction of or abolishment of antivirus measures. We offered all relevant information to the National Public Health Institute and took part in the process of adjusting and enacting sublegal regulation. The coordination did not only take place during working hours, but also engaged police management fully during nighttime or over the weekends. Lastly, I would like to emphasize that during the time of an epidemic, there is an enormous need to receive timely information and notifications on the part of the public. Many questions were arriving to our regional centers on duty and also to the Slovenian COVID-19 crisis unit and to police stations. So we established, especially for this situation, an informational center which proceeded to answer up to more than 1,000 questions on a daily basis and over 500 emails. Altogether, a little less than 23,000 requests between 2nd of April and 13th of May. And we also handed out thousands of written information at border crossing points and are all the time providing replies to media questions on the daily basis. This was in short from my side. Mr. Daniel Orobek will present more on concrete activities directly related to preventing the virus spread. Thank you very much for your attention.
Jože, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative, and we're looking also forward to keeping you around for the Q&A session later. Our next presenter, Mr. Daniel Lorbek. Daniel, thank also to you for taking your time to be here with us today and sharing some information on the operational measures of the Slovenian police. And same as Jože, you have the mic and you also have our attention.
Thank you very much, Rok, and good afternoon to everyone. As said, my presentation is about our operational measures executed in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. The main context of the response plan of the Ministry of the Interior and Police to the COVID-19 outbreak was explained by Mr. Senica. I want to add that we prepared it before the outbreak of the epidemic, and it covers inter alia the modalities of communication, the priorities of the police and the authorities within the Ministry of Interior, and their implementation under changed circumstances. An operational headquarters to carry out epidemic-related tasks was established on 12th of March, and its main tasks are coordination of cross-border flow of freight traffic, with priority focus on emergency goods and medical equipment. The police organizes and escorts convoys of freight vehicles arriving from Italy and passing to Hungary and Croatia. Next very important task is coordination of police activities in the region for the purpose of organizing so-called humanitarian convoys, composed of citizens returning to their countries and passing the territory of other countries, mostly nationals of Serbia and North Macedonia. In the beginning, over 70 police officers escorted the convoys over our state territory each day. Next is providing help to police stations in their executing of COVID-19 related tasks, and lastly, this also included some other non-operational tasks like collecting statistics and providing information about concrete operative events. We appointed one representative of the police to the National Center for Crisis Management for direct contacts between police operational headquarters and National Center. The main purpose of the center is to ensure the coordinated operation of ministries and the government as a whole. As already mentioned by Mr. Senica, we received a huge amount of questions regarding the restrictions adopted by the government, and we decided to establish a special informational center tasked to answer the question from citizens via phone or email. This relieved the operational headquarters and operational communications centers, which had previously received and answered the above questions. 5 or more police officers work in the center daily. Due to the possibility of spreading the COVID-19 infection, we adopted the decision not to send our police officers to 2 international police cooperation centers, one in Vrata Megvare Trl-Maglen in Austria and the other in Daugavas on Slovenian-Hungarian border. Instead of this, they worked from temporary facilities in Ljubljana via phone and email. For the invocation of auxiliary police force, the government adopted the decision that the amount of their working days on an annual basis was no longer limited in number. Normally, according to the police law, it is limited to 30 days per year. We adopted the police plans for the activation of Slovenian army to assist and help the police at state borders. According to our defense law, under special circumstances, our armed force gained some police powers, allowing them to assist police in case of a high number of illegal migration. We have also taken several other organizational measures which influenced by working processes. Approximately 1/3 of police officers work from home. We cancelled all training and education, organized meetings via video conferences, and change our operational procedures. For example, interviews with suspects were conducted only when urgently necessary, as well as procedure with clients, for example, when they come into a police station for some procedures.
The legal basis to initiate measures with the Infectious Diseases Act, one of the first of this measure, even before the declaration of the epidemic, was the adoption of a decree on 11th of March, which determined the conditions for the entry of passengers from Italy. Similar decrees were adopted by Slovenian government on 25th of March for the implementation of measures on the border with Austria, and on 12th of April on the border with Hungary. The special feature was that the border control was not carried out in the form of reintroduction of control at the internal borders in accordance with the Schengen Borders Code, but based on the previously mentioned act with the intention is to prevent the spread of the infectious disease. The procedure was carried out in two phases. In first phase, in addition to the police, medical staff was present at the control points and checked if the passenger had a certificate stating that their test of COVID-19 was negative, or checked if the person had any clear signs of COVID-19 infection and a fever. In case of clear signs of COVID-19, the police refused entry to the passenger. In second phase, when the exceptions and conditions for quarantine were specified, the presence of health professionals was no longer necessary. The legal basis for the border checks at the external Schengen border with Croatia is, of course, the Schengen Border Code. And in addition, the government ordered other measures to prevent the spread of the infectious disease of COVID-19 by a special decree. All border crossings for local traffic, airports and seaports were closed. And in addition, the same measures were taken as in the internal borders, also in two phases. First, with the presence of medical staff, and in the second phase by ordering quarantine for passengers entering the country. The map shows where and how we changed the border regime. I would especially like to draw attention to the larger red dots, which mean the closure of border crossings on the state border with the Republic of Croatia, and the physical closure of former border crossings on the state border with the Republic of Austria, Italy and Hungary, usually with concrete blocks. This happened for the first time since Slovenia joined the Schengen area in 2007. Procedures for passengers at the border crossing change according to the current developments of the COVID-19 situation, and the measures of the entry into the country also depended on whether the passenger was a Slovenian or foreign citizen. Quarantine was ordered for Slovenian citizens if they didn't have COVID-19 signs, or they were ordered to undergo self-isolation if he had signs. In cases of foreign nationals, quarantine was also ordered if they didn't have the obvious signs, so they had the possibility of staying in Slovenia in accordance with the recommendations of the National Institute of Public Health. However, if they didn't have the signs but they didn't have the possibility to act in accordance with the recommendations, they were also refused entry, same of those foreign nationals who had the signs. So far, more than 12,000 quarantine decisions have been issued, mostly to citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Slovenia, more than 5,000 each. As already mentioned, the conditions for entering Slovenia and other neighboring countries were constantly changing. From the beginning, there were no major problems with the crossing of daily labor migrants, and the entry of truck drivers whose final destination was Slovenia. The police put in a lot of effort to organize and coordinate activities in the transit of trucks, which I will explain later. There were no restrictions for drivers of emergency vehicles, as well as for dual owners of agricultural land on both sides of the border. After 12th of April, there were some exceptions more, and these are weekly migrants from Austria, people who attended the funeral of close relatives and left the country on the same day, and diplomats. At the beginning of the epidemic, there were major problems with the transit of trucks. Based on good cooperation with our neighbors, Croatia and Hungary, from the very beginning, we began executing organized convoys to Croatia until 19th of April and to Hungary until 22nd of March. We escorted 150 convoys with more than 6,000 trucks, which was escorted by traffic police, customs and highway supervisors. After these dates, instead of organized convoys, we organized the transit of trucks on the basis of special protocol and by issuing an order to truck drivers, which determined their route and one-stop option only. In this way, more than 40,000 vehicles transit through Slovenia on the basis of a special protocol and issuing an order. Of course, if drivers show signs of infection, we refuse entry. And irrespective of the previously described procedures, it was possible for drivers of emergency goods and medical equipment to transit Slovenia without restrictions. As can be seen from the graph, the number of lorries was the lowest immediately after the implementation of the measures, after which the number started to increase slightly. 2/3 of trucks transit Slovenia from Italy to Hungary and 1/3 to Croatia. As to measures affecting traffic of persons, the police primarily assisted in the return of Slovenian citizens from abroad. We additionally coordinated humanitarian convoys when foreign citizens were returning home and transit over the Slovenian territory. A special feature of these measures was the organization of the removal of foreign nationals whose imprisonment terms were reduced due to COVID-19 and were released from prison. The main task of the police in the implementation of restrictive measures inside the country has been overseeing the general prohibition of movement between the municipalities. These tasks were performed by the police independently or together with the health inspectorate. Some activities in the municipalities were also supervised by municipal police. The police carried out this task in public places where there would normally be larger gathering of people. On the highways, we carried out stricter measures within the so-called Pegasus operation, where we carried out tasks by diverting and controlling all vehicles. Additionally, we carried out this task on the regional and local roads towards popular tourist centers. The police don't have the main authority to take action in relation to violations of the COVID-19 related government decrees. The competent authority is the National Health Inspectorate. In total, more than 12,000 measures have been implemented, and the share of warnings and proposals submitted to the Health Inspectorate is quite similar. A very small proportion, 1%, however, require the police to take action due to non-compliance with a police order. At the time of the epidemic, the government passed a special intervention law that gave the police special quarantine control powers for the purpose of containment and control of the epidemic. Thus, in order to monitor compliance with the quarantine, the police could search for persons, identify persons by photographs, set up roadblocks with blocking points, temporarily restrict the movement of persons, and detain persons. It would obtain data on persons based on special protocol adopted by government, providing for the exchange of data with the National Institute for Public Health. The police could exercise those powers only at the time of the declared epidemic. There are some significant effect of the COVID-19 epidemic on the number of public order offenses, the number of traffic accidents, traffic offenses, and offenses relating to border affairs and foreigners. There was namely a clear downward trend, which was to be expected given the measure restricting movement. The trend in the number of these offenses is at about the same level to date, except for an obvious increase in the number of traffic offenses. Their increase is caused by increased traffic when compared to the beginning of the epidemic on the one hand, while an increased number of speeding offenses is also detected due to the still rather empty roads on the other hand. In particular, I would like to draw attention to the increased number of violations of the movement restriction at the beginning of the epidemic, marked by green line, which then began to fall with the easing of these measures. This slide shows those areas of police work where the impact of COVID-19 was not so obvious. In particular, the number of interventions and general events such as suicides and fires remained the same, while the number of criminal offenses decreased mainly in the area of property crime. The most uncharacteristic trend was revealed by the numbers of illegal migrants apprehended. Obviously, the measures related to COVID-19 in the neighboring countries and on the so-called Balkan route didn't completely stop illegal migration. What will happen during the next days with the further easing of the COVID-19 measures? What's going on? In Slovenia, after the beginning of the easing of measures, protests against the government began where protesters also draw attention to the disproportionate measures in relation to the actual situation. Protests are currently taking place every Friday, but I want to stress that protests are non-violent. As expected, the situation is deteriorating in all basic areas of police work. The number of illegal migrants is increasing, migrants coming again in larger groups. The number of traffic accidents is increasing again based on aforementioned causes. The situation is similar in the crime areas. With more people away from home again, the number of property crime is increasing. On the end, the police will, as always, carefully analyze the current situation. The experience from the first phase of COVID-19 is invaluable and will be a great help to us during the possible second wave. So has been the exchange of experience between the police forces, also with today's video conference. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation and also to taking the time in your busy day to be here with us. Okay, so let's continue. Remember, you can still post questions in the questions section. We are receiving actually quite some good questions. Let me just switch the microphone a bit so that we will all be able to engage in discussion. Okay, so the first question is, and I think, Daniel, this is for you. Can you please share information about the duration of the first phase? And second question, how many foreign nationals were denied entry and how many of them were third country nationals, if you do have that information, of course?
First phase was approximately 14 days long, and I don't have now very clear information about the numbers.
Okay, thank you. The second question, another question is, how do you track people who are in self-isolation?
It's a very hard question because, as I mentioned, our government adopts intervention law. But of course, primarily this was a task of health inspectorate, but we help them in some region where we have information that there were some problems.
Let me add something to that because I know what the question might be about. In a lot of countries, they changed the practice on protection of privacy in electronic environment. In some countries, they developed specific software solutions for mobile telephones which can be used to track the movement of people, and specifically those that are posing possible threat to the others, because they're infected. This is not the case in Slovenia. We tried to go for this solution, but there was a very heavily protests against that in the public, and specifically by the Information Commissioner in Slovenia. So this is still not the case. So Slovenia will most likely not be able to implement this kind of electronic solution. But let's see what happens in the level of the European Union, because currently they have opened some discussion on how to do this. Because one has to have in mind that if you have a person who is infected, this person is danger to all the others, and if this person does not respect ordered self-isolation or quarantine, this person can actually start all over the spreading based on the current trends or patterns that we have seen. And if you will recall the latest situation in South Korea, which went on the good wave on having control over COVID-19, only one person was able to, in several days, spread the disease to 1,500 new people, not directly, but you have a first person who has 5 contacts, and then based on the transmission ratio, you can actually reach high numbers again. So it makes a lot of sense that the governments would have possibility to, based on personal consent, track down the people which are causing threat to others.
So Andrei, let me just still bother you a bit. If I understood, you were talking about that there was discussion some time ago about that like mobile app for keeping the contact with the COVID-infected person, right? This is what you were talking about.
This is what I'm talking about.
So okay, so there were protests about this, and it seems that the protests, well, sorry to say, are becoming our national sport now, specifically in Slovenia now, against the measures that the government has undertaken in this light of curbing the spread of the COVID-19. And the question would be, your opinion, you're obviously professionals, but how proportionate are the measures that have been imposed or undertaken in relation to the number of actually infected people with the COVID-19?
I think that our measure was very well, and that's the main reason why the situation concerning COVID-19 in Slovenia is very good.
But this is again connected to the measures taken. If you didn't take those measures, then you would see large numbers, and you don't have to go very far from here. You can see the countries heavily affected. Why did that happen? Why do they have these large numbers compared to the others, including Slovenia? Because they did not introduce measures straight at the beginning, or those measures were quite flexible. So it's bad practice. So for Slovenia, one would think, and I even talk to people, they would say, what? But in Slovenia, this COVID-19 is not a problem. We have low numbers, but we have low numbers because we were taking all the precautions. This is the reason why we have low numbers.
Okay, and speaking of the numbers, and I said normally I don't think I'm a very optimistic person, but I really do hope that the scenario number 3 will come into play. But Andrei, please, what in your opinion are the triggers that will show which of the proposed scenarios or suggested scenarios is most likely to happen?
Yeah, the most simple and most efficient trigger is to follow down the number of new infections. And each time when new infections showed out, it is necessary to trace people which were in contact with this specific person. So this is pretty much the same pattern as you would be using if you're a police officer and you're investigating organized crime, to tracing down the possible contacts from one person to all the other persons. So those would be 2 essential things. First of all, having good control over the spreading of disease, so still being careful to count all the new cases. Secondly, to investigate all the contacts of the person catching the disease, and then you have to draw a correlation between the measures either enforced or eased in the society, and if this is in correlation, because it usually is, you have to understand in a correct time when there's a time to switch those measures on again, and when you can go and ease them again on the other side. Because the whole situation is pretty much similar as the forest fire. when there's a forest fire, then the firemen would come there and they will fight with this fire for several days, or if you have a big fire, it even can take weeks before this is under control. But the biggest mistake would be if those firemen would retreat from this infected area. They will have to stay on, they will have to monitor the situation, to see each and every little fire coming out again in order to cut them down and to prevent fire going up again. And the first responders, the medical professionals and the governments in the region, in the world, of course, are in the same situation. We need to stay alert.
Okay, great. Thank you. Both Jorge and Daniel, you both mentioned the 1/3 of having the strategic reserve, 1/3 of the law enforcement back. But I really like that you said that you recommended vacation. I think that's an interesting phrase. How to put it? Can you just explain what did you mean with the recommended taking of vacation?
That means that in fact, we talked with our employees and we recommended them, because on the other hand, we cannot force them to use their leave or their extra hours. And what was surprisingly also very positive, that all employees agreed with that. They all were aware with the situation and they agreed to use their leave according to the situation. So that was a very positive thing from our employees.
That is great. If you can actually transfer some of the work to the home work environment, or if people were supporting of the idea of having this being on leave, that's very positive. So we have a related question to this is actually from our colleague Jelka Clemens. If someday, God forbid, another epidemic proves to be more long-lasting, more than 2 years, and we end up with much worse consequences, including economic, and higher crime rates, what do you see as a precondition for the Slovenian police to withstand these challenges? Now, this also includes those crimes that are more likely to rise in that event, like hate crimes, hate speeches, cybercrime, break-ins.
Yeah, from our side, the first thing is to take care of for our employees, and the next thing is, yeah, like you said, to be prepared for new I don't know, criminal acts that arrive in that period, so that we can fight with them and to react immediately. That's the most important thing. Like we face now, a lot of criminals moved on IT. They were more on internet, more of that criminality, and on the other hand, we faced also criminality concerning violence at home. And the third thing is that they use this period to have a profit in this period concerning, I don't know, the protective equipment and so on.
Andrea, I'm sensing you would like to add something.
Yeah, of course. Well, this time it was pandemic. The next time something else can happen. You know, you can never predict all the possible scenarios that are going to happen, but currently we have the fresh experience on how to react in the case of pandemic. After you went through the first wave where you needed to improvise to some certain extent, now it's time to learn from our bad and good practice to be prepared for the second wave or for the future similar situation with the new pandemic. Is the new pandemic going to come? This is for sure. The history proves that this is happening time to time, and of course this one, the COVID-19, was the first one of its type, you know, because this is really hard to put under control. So a lot of unknowns in this regard. So first of all, let's go back to the drawing desk. Let's prepare for the future, and let's also think about all the other possible disasters. You know, next time it might be the earthquake. We have seen a combination of COVID-19 and earthquake, first in Croatia. Just a day or two ago, I've seen that this is happening in the other parts of the world. So yeah, we better be prepared. And the thing is that when it comes to the infectious diseases, There is no rocket science into that, because the virus can only spread from one person to another person. So the major strategy is to go for social distancing, and the result of this at the end will be twofold. Either the virus is going to win over the man, or the man is going to win over the virus. And when the virus wins, it means the person is going to die. If the person is going to win the situation, it means that the virus will die and will not be able to spread among the other people anymore. So, you know what, I'm not that pessimistic when it comes to our future, because we can still learn a lot. There's a lot of things we can do to prevent this kind of scenarios. The worst possible scenario would be if the state structures would disintegrate, then we would be in chaos. We would see crime, we would see riots, we would see robberies on the streets. And again, we can learn from the history. This had happened in some places in the world in the past.
I really like how you said that this is now a fresh situation and we can still learn from it. And I do think that you made a sort of a teaser introduction into what I will say at the end, because yes, we do have an interesting development and some interesting information that we will be doing within the border security program, and we'll get to that soon. It's very interesting. Let's just go to more questions. I really like the discussion, how it's developing. You were talking about the measures that have been taken and also the number of offenses and criminal acts. Do you have information on can you just share maybe the information on how it went with the illegal crossings of state border with the regular migrants? And what I'm specifically interested in is, has there been any cases of infections with the regular migrants? Because as you showed, the numbers didn't really stop.
There were no infections in migrants, but as I explained, the number of illegal crossings decreasing quite a lot on the beginning of COVID-19, but after 3 weeks the number goes slightly up. And as I mentioned, now the situation is not good. We got some information from the Balkan route that this route is still open, and numbers from last 2 weeks shows that that this number really increasing.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, we are currently now, well, Slovenia has been the first one to say, okay, the pandemic is over, and we are in the process of easing those measures. Andrei, I really hope that it's not one of those 4 or 5 times that you mentioned that we've already been very optimistic about the future, but we'll see in the next 14 days, I guess. So we are slowly introducing back the public transportation, very carefully introducing these measures. And there was a question from Ilgan. He said, there was a restriction in Slovenia to leave the territory of the country if the person was subject to self-quarantine measures. So, and also, was it possible to end this self-quarantine if the symptoms for infection did not actually develop during the self-quarantine?
Yes, of course. When after 14 days, if you are negative, you are negative, the self-isolation was ended. And if I understood well, the first question was, of course, we have these problems with moving people from one local community to another, and as I mentioned, a lot of them we checked on the main streets, and we have quite a lot of problems with them.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have one last question. Actually 2 questions, but let's go to the big one first. During the epidemic, did the Slovenian police have a strategy or a toolbox for dealing specifically with those individuals or groups that turn out to be far most vulnerable during the epidemic situations, and whose needs actually need to be actually need to be assessed separately. For example, victims of family crime, hate-based crime, discriminatory acts, or something like this.
We have only a slightly increase of the criminal offenses in families. That means that there were some criminal offenses and some misdemeanors in the families, because, as we know, everybody was at home, and this was not very typically that, for example, husband and wife live a lot of hours and days together. And of course, these statistics slightly increased in that time.
But to be frank, because I'm no longer working for the Slovenian police, I can say that this was one of the things that was not involved in this planning, you know, because in general plans at the beginning we're simply not covering all the issues, you know. So, but we learned from our mistakes, and for example, you said earlier that there was no safe houses, you know, available for people from the EU, but Georgia told that there were no safe houses for those which would be at the same time subject to the home violence or domestic violence, and at the same time being impacted. So this is one of the things that we learned probably, and we will include this in the future planning for the other similar situations.
So this is a lesson that has been learned and will be implemented in the future. Oh, that's good to hear. Paolo Costa, thank you for your question. So if I remember from your presentation, the training for police officials actually stopped.
Yes, mostly.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Okay, mostly the physical. The physical one. We after a period, after a few weeks, we also changed that matter. So we also moved on via internet and tried to do some of education via internet and via video. So now, okay, but it's not the same. The physical way, those that we have, they're more in little groups. But at the beginning, we canceled.
Yeah, okay. So I guess they will be introduced back gradually as the measures are eased, and I think that all the services are actually adjusting and adapting to the new situation, as are also we. So that's it for the questions. So allow me just to say a few more words regarding the planned activities of the DCAV Border Security Program in the context of this COVID-19. So in the next period, we will organize actually a workshop, and that's the introduction that Andrei made before, which I was mentioning. So we will organize a workshop where we will, together with colleagues and experts from the Border Security Program, go through all the measures that have been undertaken to see what worked well and what didn't. And based on this, we will aim to develop standard operating procedures to be used in future similar situations if they happen, or when they happen, let's say. And this webinar is, which we're doing today, is in fact an introduction into that exact workshop. After the workshop, we will organize a tabletop exercise where we will put these SOPs to the test and amend them so that they are really applicable in the countries of the program. So those standard operating procedures which will be developed will be put to the test and make sure that they are applicable also in real life situations. Whether we will be able to do it in person or we will move it online still depends on how the development of the coronavirus situation goes. After this, we will print it and distribute it, and also promote it at various high-level meetings, such as the Heads of Border Police Services or Ministerial Conference, and we will also organize a promotional webinar where we will introduce everyone to these procedures. Now, if the next wave happens, or when the next wave happens, we are hoping that these standard operating procedures will offer some sort of guidelines and will be already identified at that time, and will actually make, how I want to say, addressing these issues more manageable and actually easier, learning from the current lessons. So this is it from our side. Thank you all for attending. We hope that it was interesting for you and that you've learned some useful information. For additional questions, please feel free to write us at bs.program, that's double M, @dcaf.ch. We ask you all to stay online just a bit longer and tell us what your thoughts were on this webinar, and it will also help us to improve in the future. Now, on behalf of the speakers, DCAP and myself, thank you for attending and have a nice remainder of the day. And see you again soon. Goodbye.